The only reason the West is crumbling the way it is because of ARI's poor leadership. If Scott were in charge, and you can add William. I think William is Scott's partner in crime. We would have coalitions, and therefore would have won. I think you're absolutely right, Liam. Maybe we should, yeah. Maybe I should just quit, put Scott in charge.
Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff, along with William Swig, my partner in crime. William, how are you today?
I'm doing well, partner. How are you?
I'm good. Well, we're going to be talking today. We'll have some more Youron clips, but we're going to be talking about the nature of a threat and how to handle it.
Right. And just to comment on that teaser clip we had, I think Youron has finally had a bright idea, and he should put us in charge, because I think we'd be doing a lot better job.
I'm not sure how sincere he was.
Right. But we are going to be talking about the nature of threats and how to deal with them. And we think this is an important topic because both of us have been noticing that people at ARI and a lot of other people have had some difficulty identifying today's threats and the biggest threats. And this is a strange thing because Ayn Rand pretty much identified them for us, several decades ago. And I just want to talk about what I think is important about identifying a threat. And the first important thing is that you can actually identify it. It is essential to identify a threat because in order to deal with a threat, you first have to be able to, know what it is and evaluate it as a threat, and then figure out a way to eliminate it as a threat. So if you don't know what a threat is, then you can't even begin to identify it, evaluate, and eliminate. And so my general definition of a threat is that it's something that poses a danger to your life. And this could be a lot of different things. But it poses a danger to your life and the people you care about, including your family, your society, your community, or even your nation. So real threats disrupt your life. It could be a physical disruption or a mental disruption in your thinking. You can't think of anything else other than trying to deal with this threat. And a potential threat or a threat also poses a potential harm. So it's pointing towards a battle. So a threat is like the opposite of someone coming up to you and apologizing or making amends. A threat aims towards a fight, a war, something bad happening to you. Whereas, that's the opposite of making amends, where you're going to make peace with this person and they're going to maybe pay you back for what they stole or something like that.
Sure. For me, I've seen this trend or pattern of people taking the biggest threats and if it's something they can't actually deal with, they just kind of will declare it not to be a threat. And they'll just go on and focus their time attacking on things that, either the threat doesn't like to, or the real threat doesn't like to, or that, just something they can have control over and something they can feel like they're having a change on. And so I want to explore that. And I think it's happening all up and down the liberty movement, not just at ARI. It's this, attitude of just, I've even seen articles in newspapers saying, China is kind of pushing this PR move that they don't want to be seen as a threat. Well, sure, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, honestly, whether you're a threat or not, you want to at least paint whether you're a threat. I happen to think China is a threat, but we'll get into that as the show rolls forward.
if I can just say one small thing,
Sure.
you make a very interesting and potent point here, because China doesn't want to be seen as a threat, and yet I think we both agree that they are one of the main threats, especially to America as a nation and our economy and that sort of thing. But they're also a threat to just the Chinese people. So I think that the threats we should be focusing on are these ones that don't appear to be threats, but we kind of have that inkling, that they are a threat or there's something wrong here. And I think a lot of people understand that China is a threat, but they don't want to admit it. It's like it's too much for them to face. And it might be too much because at the core of their understanding or their knowledge, they can't really identify a threat because they don't know what a threat is. And I think that's the problem, is that we're so degraded as a culture, as a people of learning, that we have lost the ability to identify a threat. And this is coming from the top down, the institutions, the people who run our universities and our institutions of learning. They have dumbed us down, or the population in general. They've dumbed down the students so much that you can't even identify a threat that's right in front of you.
Yeah, that's definitely going on. I think I have this clip from Ayn Rand from 1968 warning people about communists and their fellow travelers, speaking of China. And she makes a good distinction between fear and cowardice.
If you see a horde of savages advancing upon you, who have previously announced that they intend to exterminate and enslave you, wouldn't you, in reason, be justified in feeling fear? Not the fear of cowardice, but the realization of the danger and the necessity of taking action against it?
There's a time to sound the alarm bell, to say things are going in the wrong direction. I think that's a consistent theme of her writing.
Yeah, she definitely um, made that a huge theme, and she wrote, a novel about it. These group in Atlas Shrugged, a group of people see this horde of barbarians coming at them, and they take action to try to get away from it. And I think that she's in this clip, she's pretty much describing the left. I don't think she sees a horde of barbarians on the right. I mean, she kind of cozied up to the right a little bit and was able to work with them. But the left has gone insane.
Yeah,
And
well,
go
I
ahead.
mean, she's talking in 68, but I mean, even I won't even try to say, oh, how she'd vote today per se, but what she's saying is that, in Atlas Shrugged, you also had the bad guys trying to say everything's fine, there's no threat.
Well, yeah, that's what people chant when they want, all your property, and they want to turn you into a slave. They don't worry, we'll take everything's fine. We're going to take care of everything. Nothing to see here. This is when you should be alarmed, is when a threat, an obvious threat, is telling you not to worry. Like, you have eyes, you have ears, use them. You know, these people are saying, we're going to take over your government and tax you to death and take all your property and tell you what to say. And I mean, they're telling you this stuff. They are
Or the future
socialists.
belongs to identity groups you're not part of.
Yeah, they're like, you're white, you have no say. I mean, these are literal things that they are teaching in school, is that you can't speak because you're white. These are this
Or even
is
that
evil.
capitalism's racist.
Exactly. So we're hearing all of the rhetoric of evil, and yet there's people out there who can't see this as the main threat. They can't see the left as the main threat. They think the right is some equal threat. There's none of this crap. Like, what's the bad stuff coming from the right is just standard stuff that they've been doing all along. You know,
Or
and it's
it's
not,
a cover story for caving to the dominant
yeah,
power.
and it's not very effective. They've made some inroads on abortion, but even that's getting pushed back. And so
Yeah.
there's not much threat on the right that I see of them doing anything on the level of what the left has already accomplished and is injecting into our culture.
Well, by the 70s, Rand was saying that the biggest threat is coming from our universities.
Sum it up, I feel that this country is being destroyed by its philosophy, specifically by its universities. The most dangerous thing in this country today are the universities, because they're teaching the kind of ideas that would necessarily have to lead to the destruction of this country. I think that the American people is too good for that kind of program. You notice that the people are turning to the right. That's a very healthy sign, but there is no leadership on the right. There is no intellectual leadership. There are no ideas.
It's interesting that she thinks that the evil ideas are coming from the left, and specifically the ideas that we're hearing in the universities. And of course, this was decades ago, but I think it's basically worse now. So she was identifying something that has only gotten worse. It hasn't gotten better.
Well,
So go ahead.
I just think that's true, but at the same time, I mean, she's warning that the universities are teaching would go into the culture over the next 50 years. That the
Right.
threat would, enter the culture.
Right. And I think it was entering the culture at that time. I mean, she was identifying like the early stages of this downfall. But also, I want to make a point about the universities. She identifies the universities as the problem because they're teaching the evil ideas. But the universities as a university is not the actual problem. It's the people in the universities teaching the philosophies of evil. So it's the evil teachers. And that's what we should be focusing on. Who are these evil teachers? Obviously, not every teacher is evil. Some are good, but the ones who are dominating academia are the evil ones who are teaching bad ideas, and specifically anti-American ideas. They're teaching students to hate their country, hate their culture, hate their I don't want to say ethnicity because that's a stolen concept, but or an anti-concept. But they're teaching people to hate their skin color, their race. You know, these are just evil things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty much all I have to say about that. I do have a follow-up comment on the previous clip, because I noticed in that previous clip of Ayn Rand, she uses words like we're in a battle, we have the fear of a deadly enemy. She sees this as a battle. We're already in a battle. We're at the beginning of a battle. And so who are we at war against? And I think it's clear from her rhetoric, and I think from what we're seeing even today, that we're at war with the left. The left is at war with America. If we want to call ourselves Americans and we want to hold up American values, then we need to go to war, all out war, total war with the left.
Well, I mean, I get what you're saying. I'm fine with a voting coalition, just in terms of strategy for now. But Youron Brookes came out with a list of threats 3 years ago, and he identifies his top two, and the first one is still universities.
The biggest threat to freedom long term for the United States are the universities. The universities are number one by far, because who trains the teachers who teach in the government schools? Who figures out the new math gibberish that they're taught? Who figures out Site C and rejects phonics? Who figures out all the nonsense, all the BS? Ooh, now I'm guilty of Trump derangement syndrome because I said the universities are the biggest threat. Wow, that's kind of weird. All right, Universities are the biggest threat, in my view. Second, number two, after universities, you'll see a theme here. Long-term threat to the United States, to freedom, and everything good in this country is government schools.
So he uses long-term threat, but I mean, in a certain way, you can just say you're waiting for the long-term threats to ignore the results of the last 50 years of the university corruption.
Yeah, I don't know how long one institution can be a threat. Like, how long are we just going to look at a threat? This reminds me of, I bring this up a lot because I think it's a classic scene, Monty Python scene, where in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the knight is charging the castle guards, but it's the same scene of him charging over and over and over. He doesn't make any progress until like the 10th cut, he's right upon the castle guards and slitting their throat. This is what we're doing. We're just looking at the universities as a threat each decade. Each decade they get the same amount closer to being a real like a real enemy, but they're always just a threat. So like we're going to be sitting here and like people are going to be objectivists in like 2100 are going to be just sitting there saying, "Oh, the universities are a threat," you know, and they're going to be under the thumb of the left and totally under a dictatorship, and they're going to be so just like blinded that they're still going to be calling them a threat.
They're gonna be marching people off to re-education camps, and we're supposed to say, I'm blaming the universities from 100 years ago. I mean,
Yeah,
deal
they're
with the
going to
guy
be
marching into the camp.
they're going to be dangling from a hangman's rope saying, "Oh, I see the threat."
It's we'll hope it doesn't come to that.
Well,
Now,
just to reiterate, so it's not the university itself that's a threat. It's the people. You got to identify a group of people who are a threat, because
well, it's their
people act.
impact on the culture in a generation, and that keeps happening.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we see them more as a threat. They're in the government, they're in the schools, they are the enemy. They're the enemy you got to go out and fight. They're not just a threat. So, we got to identify the group, the people who the opposing force, of soldiers who are doing harm, the anti-American administrators, teachers, students, donors, the donor class. These are the people who keep the institutions going, who keep the battle going against America. And if you don't, this is the one thing I like about the right, which is what they're doing now, is they're engaging in their own form of cancel culture. They're trying to distance themselves, separate from the leftist institutions, and form their own institutions to provide an alternative culture, an alternative way of life for conservatives and people on the right. And that's what we should have been advocating decades ago.
Yeah, I'm
That's basic.
sympathetic to it as well, but you'll see many in the libertarian movement that are like, my principles, and they're just going to take whatever's thrown at them, and they're kind of the cheek turners of the culture more than the Christians.
And when you think about it, this is the plot of Atlas Shrugged. This is like the conservatives are the ones doing the plot of Atlas Shrugged, and separating from the evil culture and forming their own society.
Well, it's not quite as hidden, but
it's not. It can't be hidden like Atlas Shrugged, but it's out in the open. That's what they're doing. They're doing Atlas Shrugged. They're shrugging from this woke leftist culture.
Better than a lot in the liberty movement, I will grant you that. But in fact, speaking of soldiers, Youron in January of 2022 predicted that Russia wouldn't invade Ukraine.
Other than that, it doesn't sell anything to the West. Russia is not an export-led economy other than energy. Russia knows that that Europe has to buy energy from them. But look, I don't think Russia wants to invade Ukraine because I think it's a real challenge for them.
Well, it's not surprising that he was wrong. I mean, he's wrong about most of his predictions. And that's the nature of someone who makes predictions and who doesn't know what he's talking about.
Now,
But
to be fair, he says that he's predicted a lot right on Ukraine. Other than that, that it would, Ukraine would hold out a lot more. So, but I mean, the seeing the threat on the horizon in the first place is, kind of the big prediction.
yeah, but like like I was saying about being able to identify a threat, I don't think Iran can identify a threat. I think, and that's why he has trouble making predictions about threats and what they might do, or even what people will say.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
so, yeah, go ahead.
just along those lines, on China, I mean, my contention again is that sometimes, if we can't deal with a threat so much, it's easier just to say it's not a threat. I mean, that probably happened to some extent even with Jews in Germany in the 30s. You just have to tell yourself that even to survive. This next clip is Youron talking about China. I should say on this one, I did splice together 3 of his comments, but it's not out of context for the attitude that he's conveyed about China.
But China is not a military threat to the United States. China is not, quote, an economic threat to the United States. Stop worrying about China and start worrying about America. China is not the enemy. Everything I read suggests that it's becoming less and less and less of a threat, not more of a threat.
Well, it sounds like he's confused because at first China isn't a threat, but then it's becoming less of a threat. So I don't know how you become less of a threat if you're not a threat in the first place. But I think he needs to just figure out the ways in which China is a threat and just deal with it, because China is a threat, and it's a threat because it's a dictatorship. It's a
I
threat to
mean,
its own citizens, and it's a threat to the world.
just what they did to Hong Kong makes them more of a threat. They've gotten closer to Russia since Ukraine, and they routinely blackmail or buy our politicians. They've been doing since 96 or earlier.
And those are the sorts of things that he'll evade because he wants China to not be a threat so that we can trade with it. Because he's all about global trade. He thinks that's the bee's knees. And he wants to justify his view of international trade. And so these are the sorts of extreme evasions he's willing to engage in order to justify his views on trade, free
Well, I
trade.
think he was late on seeing the threat of China. They were doing junkets over there for many years. I think Robert Garmon moved over there. And, I just, by even by 2022, Euron is ready to tisk companies that trusted China too much.
And the fact that the country was becoming more free, and the fact that the country was welcoming of business and the profit motive and entrepreneurship. Because of all of that, China became a powerhouse, a productive powerhouse. And as part of that, American business started increasing their investment in China. And sadly, what happened is that the supply chain became very narrow, if you will. Companies forgot, ignored, started to ignore the concept of, there used to be, I remember we talk about this in the 80s and early 90s, used to be a concept of country risk or political risk, which was the idea you don't want to back one particular country too much because you don't know if the ruler changes, or an authoritarian comes to power, or they get invaded, or something like that. You want to have some country diversification.
Oh, sorry, Euron, I didn't diversify because I was told China wasn't a threat.
Yeah, if you follow his advice, you're going to be wrong all the time.
I just remember George Carlin joking about flight attendants welcoming us to a city they've only just arrived at as well. You know, she just got there too, and she's coming off like the freaking mayor's wife. He's doing the same thing, educating us now about how there's country risk in China. Yet less than 6 months ago, he was downplaying risk in China.
Yeah, well, if he goes where the wind takes him, I don't know what's going on with his. I think it has a lot to do with probably where his money comes from or something like that. It's strange. I don't know why he would be so contradictory. It's amazing to me how quickly China went from being a struggling non-threat to a powerhouse dictatorship. I mean,
Yeah,
he's got one of the worst threat detectors in the world. He's he's all over the place, and this is a recurring theme that we've shown through many examples that half the time he's just bullshitting. And if you're always bullshitting, then you're just going to be contradicting yourself all the time because you don't care about consistency or integrity to principles or integrity to the facts even. Like, when did China become this great beacon of freedom? I mean, because they allow McDonald's in? Is that why they're free? You know, a lot of places that are totally under the thumb of a dictator still allow businesses because that's how they get respect. They allow a certain amount of free. This is a classic principle: is if you want to be a dictator, you got to allow some people to be free, because then you can say, hey, look, you can point to the example of where you're not a dictator, right? But ultimately, you're even these businesses that are being allowed to trade in China, they're under the thumb of the Communist Party. The Communist Party can just kick you out or take your business at any time.
right. But what? That's not a threat?
Yeah, it's just because they allow certain American businesses or they allow certain trade. They do that because if they're full blown isolationists, they're not going to survive.
Mhm.
Dictatorships can't be pure evil because pure evil can't survive. They have to
They
be certain percent evil, and then let the people who can actually produce and make wealth for the dictatorship, let them thrive a little bit.
they're only going to go after the non-compromisers first. But
Yeah, if you're totally against them, then they're going to crush you. But if you're
that's
a
right.
willing participant, if you're a collaborator, business,
Sanctioner.
yeah, sanctioner, then they're going to allow you in. So
It
yeah,
just
and this is another thing, another point. Sorry to jump on you, but another point I wanted to make, which I think is crucial, is that the people at ARI are so against the sanction of the victim. They don't want you to talk to libertarians because libertarians are so evil. And yet here they are saying free trade with China when China is this huge dictatorship and evil to the core. And yet they're willing to stand up and apologize for China.
yeah, it's not just ARI. I mean, a lot of people deal with China, and it's understandable. I mean, you almost have to in this global trade world, but it's another thing to pretend that they're not a threat. If these businesses have to kowtow to keep doing businesses and not get their assets seized or shut down, it's a threat. It may be worth working around, but it's still a threat.
Yeah, and it's amazing how the extent they go to show that they're not a threat or try to prove that they're not
Mhm.
a threat.
Exactly.
Just because they want to say free trade with China. They want to maintain this principle that, in my opinion, is flawed, very flawed when it comes to international trade. They want to maintain this principle that free trade with China is good for us. And so therefore we need to we need to minimize their evil.
Well, yeah, that's true to be able to rationalize continuing to do it. But speaking of downplaying threats, Youron in 2021 did a show titled Democrats Are Failing Across the Board. You see, if they're failing, they're not a threat. But during the show, he's asked a good question about what it would take for him to finally see the left as a bigger threat.
What are some examples of facts you would need to see in order to reevaluate your assessment that the left is less threat than the right? I'd have to see the left's agenda not just have support among the elites, but actually start gaining support among the people, the people out there outside of San Francisco and New York, elites. I'd have to see parents demanding at school board meetings that CRT be taught. I'd have to see some of this language not just affect the people there and not just the kind of the corporate elite, but the common people, the majority of this country. I'd like to see these kind of things really start influencing.
So here we are with the confusion about a threat or what a threat is. He's saying that in order to consider the left a threat, he wants to see them actually become ingrained, become the culture. Like everyone will be demanding CRT and things like this. And so that's not a threat. That's already the implementation of an ideology. That's where you've lost. You forgot about the threat. You didn't identify it. You didn't evaluate it. You didn't eliminate it. You didn't even battle it. You just caved. You surrendered to the threat, and now you're under the thumb of the dictators.
He said he won't fight if he thinks it can't be won, and yet he said he won't agree the left is worth fighting until he sees evidence that they've completely won.
Yeah.
That's...
I mean, this if I didn't know better, I'd think that he was actually working for the enemy, because it's the sort of rhetoric you hear from people who are. Do you ever read that Terry Goodkind book where there's the people saying it's, the people who come before the enemy try to convince you that it's all going to be good, and actually the people who are coming to take over your nation or whatever are the good guys. It's like him being a mouthpiece or propaganda for the enemy. So
Well,
this is the sort of thing you'd hear.
I honestly think he believes the left has already won. He says they've been winning for the last 100 years. If you can't win, it's not worth fighting. And so, he's just decided this is the culture that we have. It's not terrible. And he just wants to gain kind of mainstream acceptability. He talks about wanting to get published in the Atlantic. So, I think that's more motivating it than, consciously he wants them to win. He just has accepted they already have. But later in that show,
he's given up. That's kind of my point, is that he gave up, he surrendered, and so now he's trying to convince you to give up and
right,
surrender.
and also that he hasn't given up, that it's just that they're not a threat.
But he's also saying that one thing he says is that objectivism needs to dominate, and objectivism won't dominate for 100 years. So that's another black pill that he's feeding people, is that not only have we lost, but we might as well not even really fight now, because it's going to take 100 years for our ideas to be accepted. Like,
that's not the worst part of it. The worst part is that anyone else thinking that it's worth fighting right now is doomed to fail and evil and a compromiser and a fascist.
Yeah, it's pretty silly.
But
I don't. It's like he's not actually a follower of Rand, because I can't see Rand coming to this evaluation. She never really stopped fighting. She kind of gave up on the conservatives a little, but I think that at this point, you don't have much choice. You either got to form a coalition with somebody who at least will listen to Randian ideas, or give up like he does. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
think our only choice now is to find people who care about Rand, are willing to listen to us, and then we will try to influence them.
right. You go to war with the army you've got. But later in that same show, I asked him if saying the left can't win can become a rationale not to try to fight.
Scott asks, could a belief that the left can't win or is failing become a rationale to not fight? Didn't you say the left has been winning for the last 100 years? Yes, it wins intellectually, it wins economically, it wins culturally, but the nihilism cannot win.
It's just so odd because it seems like he's severing the connection between the concrete and the abstract. It's like he's saying everything about the left can win, including their culture, but their nihilism, which is the abstraction, can't win. No, well, their nihilism is applied to the philosophy, economics, and culture. That is their nihilism. He doesn't seem to get that nihilism is this abstract idea which is being applied in reality by the left in their economics and culture and the way they act, what they do on the streets, what they do in government.
Yeah.
It's an application of nihilism. So their nihilism is winning.
You can't, it's like how you can't be inconsistently wrong or you'd be dead. You can't be a consistent nihilist. You got to do something to try to put it into place.
Well,
I
Yeah.
mean, the threat I'm worried about is the left winning intellectually, economically, and culturally.
Yeah, I mean, when are you ever going to have like this pure nihilism? If you have pure nihilism, it's just going to be chaos. I mean, everybody's going to be killing each other and destroying everything. I mean, that's not a civilization. That's already the breakdown of society. So we're not going to, hopefully, we won't get to that point. We'll at least have some sort of like medieval ages or something where some people can survive. But this thing about nihilism is he's saying their nihilism won't win. Well, they've been teaching it and applying it for decades, and it's focused on destroying Western culture. So I think that's maybe what he's not getting, is that this nihilism is destroying the West. So it's basically bringing Eastern ideas or like socialism and self-sacrifice and all kind and subjectivism. It's bringing these sorts of things into the West and making them dominant, so that destruction does happen, but it gets to a point where we're still able to contain it a little bit because we all don't want to die. We do have some common sense, and so we don't let it get to a particular extreme. We're just going to become collectivists, and that's how our society is going to be run. It's going to destroy the West.
Well, that actually fits in with this next clip because Youron tries to pivot out of what seems to be a contradiction by basically saying left is right.
Of course you fight. You fight evil wherever you find it. And since it's evil, you fight it. But I don't think it's, and let's be clear, in a sense, the coming authoritarianism will be the left's victory. If somebody from the right combines environmentalism, social justice, and religion and nationalism all together and becomes dictator of the United States, will that be the left winning or the right winning? Well, it certainly will be true that the left made that victory possible, that the left laid the foundation for that victory. And in many respects, their agenda will have won. So, yeah, the left will win. I just think the left will win through a candidate of the right.
You got all that?
Yeah. So the left will win because the right is going to pick up the left's flag and fly it, and then they'll fight better for the left. So I don't know. I mean, this is all a bit nutty because I think there is a clear distinction between the right and the left, and it's basically along the lines of individualism and collectivism. Neither side might be the best advocates for those ideas, but it's clearly the dividing line. You know, we've got socialists on the left and we've got capitalists on the right, and some of them, they're mixed bags. They don't all
Well, it is
argue the
mixed, and there
same.
are Republicans calling for government controls. I think as the whole culture moves left, so will the right. But they're using that as an excuse to say everyone's socialist, so I can cave to the hardcore socialists.
Yeah, and Euron identifies the fact that it's the left driving this, and so if the left is the main cause of our downfall, why don't we step to the right and help them out? You know, help them figure this out. You know, give them some ideas on how to defeat the left, maybe become better capitalists. You know, this is what we should be doing if it's really the left who's the driving force. I also wanted to say something about Euron and his cutting ties with the concept of evil, because it seems like he can say that, you know, we fight evil wherever we find it, of course, and because he's speaking so abstractly and so disconnected from reality that he doesn't have a concrete for the evil. He's separated the concrete from the abstract, so he can just ramble
It's like
off these
all non-objectivists.
yeah, he can ramble off these sayings about evil and how we must fight it, but he doesn't actually, when it comes down to identifying evil, I don't think he has a clue on like what is the main evil and the biggest evil and which ones we should fight and
Oh,
where the line in the sand is and whose side we should be on, that sort of thing.
but contraire, woke, Euron's talking about woke can't be a long-term threat in this next clip. He does tell us what does scare him.
What's destroying America, or what will lead to a new ideology in America, is not HR departments. It's the backlash against HR departments. It's a backlash against the disintegrated philosophy that they are preaching, that they are teaching, that they are advocating for. That's what scares me. What scares me is that the M2s will be anti-Marxists, and they'll be anti-woke, and they'll be anti the HR departments.
I guess he's alluding to some rise of Hitler again. You know, Hitler's going to be reborn in the right because that's the only way to defeat the left. This is just silly. I think a lot of us, including some of objectivist lecturers and prominent figures who lean towards the right, they've pointed out that we're not going to return to the medieval ages. We're too far along in developments, technological developments, economic developments, and knowledge. Our knowledge base is too good now that we're not going to go back to a Christian theocracy. That's just not going to happen. If anything, we're going to have some new religion spring up from the left, which I think is this woke culture. And they're going to invent new fantasies like white men are evil and things like this. And that's going to be the new religion. And he just still refuses to understand this. You know, the Christians are not the biggest threat. It's whatever religious ideas are rising on the left.
Yeah, and by early 2023, he's actually now going off of data that shows woke has peaked, which he's been talking about for a while anyway.
If you look at the frequency of the use of the term racist, racists, racism, right? Again, it was pretty flat until about 2010. Almost no. I mean, there was always discussion about racism, but 2010, it just goes like that. It just goes through the roof. Peaks at 2020, collapses in 2021, goes down again in 2022. And, in places like the Wall Street Journal, it's almost back to 2010 levels. Places like the New York Times, it's back to like 2015, 2016 levels. In the Washington Post, it's back to 2015, maybe 2016, 17 levels. Every single one of the major publications, it's down significantly. So I've told you, I thought wokeness has peaked, but this guy is giving us data, which is cool.
Good news, academia has data showing that they're not a threat. Take that, Ayn Rand.
Well, usually when something has peaked, it means it's already taken over. So again, he just doesn't know what a threat is. But
Well, the peak, I mean, that is almost a bromide these days. They're like, woke is peaked. And it's just, I mean, some of it I even see on the right. It's people trying to make themselves feel better or have some wins. And I don't want to take that away from anybody, but at the same time, I see people trying to say woke is peaked as a way of saying it's not a threat. We can keep punching right to save ourselves.
It just occurred to me that in one sense, he's right. It's not a threat because it's already taken over. It's not a threat anymore if you're already under the thumb of whatever the threat used to be. So if the threat was that we're gonna be just ruled by these woke leftists and Democrats, then that's already happened. So the threat's over. Now we're dealing with the reality, with the actuality of
when
the woke I almost cursed it, the woke threat.
When Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, it was no longer a threat.
Yes, exactly. So damn, man, he's clever. His rhetoric is beyond us, I guess, because he's actually a truth speaker. He's actually telling us what reality is, but he's not admitting that. Oh, he actually does admit that we've lost, right? So on one hand, he's saying there's no threat, which is true because it's already happened, and then on the other hand, he's saying that we've surrendered, which is true because we're not fighting. So I don't know what his purpose is other than to tell us what we already know now. Here we are trying to fight and trying to eliminate, the danger here of socialists completely taking over. Also another thing here is that if the woke threat is it depends on what the danger level is or the immersion level is, like how prominent are the left in the culture. If they're a low level threat, then any increase to that would be mild. But if they're a high level threat, then an increase would be like disastrous. So we need to figure out how bad is the left's takeover of our culture. If it's almost, if
It's
it's
gotten so
almost
bad you can't even call it a threat anymore.
yeah, if it's almost complete, then the threat is like, okay, well, they're gonna do a little more damage to us than they've been doing, but the damage they've been doing is a catastrophe. It's catastrophic. So that's the
Yeah.
sort of identification and evaluation we're not getting because uh, Yaron has dismissed the threat and dismissed and is surrendered. Well, how can you not see the threat and then also surrender to it? So I don't know how that works either.
This next clip's a little more slightly longer, but it's it's Youron telling us not to worry about Biden hiring the 80,000 IRS agents. And in Atlas Shrugged, when the deep state honchos are planning Directive 10289, Wesley Mount asks, but can we get away with it? And President Thompson answers, tone it down, dress it up, and get your press boys to chant it, and you won't have to worry. Well, the channels in the press seem to have won over Youron, who has an important message about the plan to hire those $80,000. There's something to be worried about, and it's that you're getting too worked up about it.
And while I hate the idea that the IRS hires anybody, it's not as bad as it's being made out to be. Don't panic. The world is not going to come to an end. So let's start with the fact that one, the $80 billion that the IRS is going to get is spread over 10 years. Half of the people working for the IRS today are about to retire. So over the next 10 years, half of the employees at the IRS are going to retire. So a big chunk of these new employees are just replacing existing employees. Just replacing existing employees. So another reason not to work. I say it's horrible, complain about it, bitch about it, do everything, but don't panic and don't be afraid. And this is generally my advice, right, on most political things. But I find that every time there's something in the news, everybody flips out and goes crazy, and this is the end of the world, and including, you know, the Republicans who have every incentive to say this about the Biden administration and to let you know how terrible this is and how awful this is, and again, this is the end of the world. It's not. It's just not. Everything's going to be okay.
I don't even know why you would expend energy on downplaying the threat of the IRS. I mean, this is something that this is a main tenet of objectivism, is that taxation is, you know, basically the government pointing a gun at you and stealing from you. So why would he even try to downplay this?
Yeah, and this is not someone who's always Mr. Optimism. He said in 2020 that if Trump won, it would be the end of America. So, you know, but
well, he's very prone to that sort of hyperbole. But I think this goes beyond hyperbole. He seems pretty calm in this clip, and he's trying to make an actual, like, logical point. Is that
sounds like a Treasury Department spokesman.
Yeah, he's an unpaid spokesman for the government. But I also want to make a different point of, you know, about just ARI and people who have nonprofits. They're pretty much dependent on the government and the IRS for granting them that status. So it's kind of like these charitable organizations or nonprofits, 501, was it 3C or B or something like that? They are like wings of the government. You know,
I mean,
they're taking your money, and they don't have to pay taxes on it, and then they're speaking out, you know, in defense of the IRS, sort of, even though he says you criticize it all you want, sure, you know, free speech and all that.
right.
But
He
when it
didn't have
comes
his
to
normal
actually,
passion when he's really angry about something.
yeah,
But
he says don't panic, which is his way of saying don't take it seriously.
yeah, I just don't think it's the nonprofit status. I mean, he's saying that he's defending Biden. He's acting as an apologist for him. I mean, there's a point that wasn't in that clip where he's trying to rationalize it, saying they're going to hire IT people and programmers. They want to improve their IT infrastructure. I mean, would John Galt have been more understanding if President Thompson convinced him that the IRS just needs to update their infrastructure?
Right. It's a lack of focus, and it goes to something, you know, you've been saying a lot about treating both sides as an equal enemy or threat. I mean, it's kind of like an egalitarian version of objectivism here. It's where
When
he's
is he calming people, saying, you know, don't freak out about what the left is saying? I mean, this is essentially one of those Republicans pounce stories where it's like the news is that the Republicans are reacting too much to it. God, people are seeing threats out there. We got to put the kibosh on that.
You know what it could also be is him simply projecting his own derangement. So he's saying, don't panic, you know, but really he means I shouldn't panic as much as I do. because he obviously gets very emotional, especially when you're criticizing him and talking about Trump and all that. So I think it could be just psychological projection. He thinks that if you're arguing that the IRS is evil and you should be afraid of these 80,000 new agents, that he's going to come up with ways for you to not panic, because that's what he's trying to do. Maybe he's recognized that he has this TDS and he's trying not to panic as much.
But he's defending the current regime. Now that Biden won, you know, free speech is great, the IRS is great, everyone else is just getting too worked up about threats. You know, in February 22, Leonard Peikoff came out in support of the Canadian truckers protesting their vax mandates. And Yaron disagrees with Peikoff, and it turns out that the disagreement is mainly about the threat level today.
I completely agree with Leonard that if we're in a state of tyranny, or on the verge of a state of tyranny, if tyranny's here, you know, first of all, under a state of tyranny, everything's allowed in a sense. Whatever you think will move us towards a state of freedom, or slightly greater freedom, or making your voice heard, or just standing up, is absolutely legit. And I said that. I said, you know, if particularly if what we were talking about here was a revolution, then if we're in tyranny, then let's have a revolution, and I'd be supportive, maybe, right? Depending on who exactly was revolting and what were they revolting for, what were they trying to achieve.
He's still a maybe, even if we're in tyranny, unless he has perfect allies that agree in advance to his post-war plans.
Yeah, I mean, you still wouldn't want to sanction your abuser. So I don't know. I think he's just fantasizing that we're in a tyranny. He doesn't actually believe it, or believe that we're on the edge of a fascist tyranny or some sort of socialist tyranny.
But he thinks if Trump wins, we could go authoritarian in 10 years.
He's very into the future. Like he likes living in the future, making predictions and having fantasies, and so his reality will always be like 10 years from now. So there's always going to be this threat, you know, and but we don't have to worry about it too much because it's not a big deal until it actually becomes a big deal. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what you do, how you deal with this sort of mentality. Like he's not a fighter anymore. I guess he's retiring and sort of doesn't want to be part of the solution.
Right. Well, I mean, to me, a key point is that, you know, Peikoff, he not only sees the left as a bigger threat, but he also sees the threat level as more imminent, like us, while Yaron is claiming that the right is a bigger threat, but also it's further away, you know, at least unless Trump won. But to me, it's a bunch of contradictory positions meant to rationalize backing Biden and the Dems, no matter what happens. Speaking of your, you know, talking about how he was in the past, I dug up a clip of Yaron in 2015, and he was warning people about free speech being under attack, especially at universities.
Campuses, universities, the places where you're supposed to open your mind and hear all kinds of points of view. Do you know they have free speech zones on university? Little areas where you actually can talk. So this very fundamental principle is under attack. And again, we truly have chosen to stick our head in the sand.
Classic projection.
Well, so that is a good thing, that it's important not to stick your head in the sand when there are threats. But, you know, by 2019, he's asked about whether losing free speech makes it the time to fight back. And I think he gives a very honest answer.
You say that if we lose free speech is when we have to rebel violently, even if we lose. What if well, not necessarily. When we lose free speech, One option is to rebel violently. The other option is to disappear. It's to leave. That is, if you're going to lose, there's no point in committing suicide. So another option is to find some other way to live, maybe in a different country, maybe in a different part of the world. But fighting to lose is...
Well, that was odd as well. It seems like he was comparing fighting for your rights to suicide. Like I guess it's a saying, like he's just using it as a colloquialism or something, but in his mind it's equivalent to committing suicide. Well, you don't commit suicide when you fight for your freedom. You know, that's dying for a cause. And
Yeah,
hopefully
and you also don't know for sure whether it's going to be successful. But if you have this attitude that, oh, I'm not going to try if I don't think we can win, how good are you going to be at standing up to threats in the first place?
Okay, so also another point I wanted to make is that I don't think we're going to lose free speech in the traditional sense. Again, our culture has gone too far. Even in the Eastern culture, they've gone too far to just eliminate free speech entirely. First, we're going to lose our property. You know, the socialists are coming for us, and they're going to take our property. They'll probably start with rich white people, which I think they're already trying to do. But then they're just going to start taking everybody's property because it's a domino effect, and they're going to need more and more land and more goods and resources to sustain the parasitic fascist regime or whatever's coming, some sort of socialism.
Well,
So
yeah, I mean, I guess the rationale is that free speech at least gives us the ability to call it out. But, if everyone's self-censoring because they're worried about cancel culture and just not calling it a threat, as a matter of fact, by 2022, Yaron is saying that free speech is going great.
One of my goals is for you to appreciate the fact, in a sense, counterintuitive fact, that we actually have more free speech today. Our free speech rights are better protected today than maybe they've ever been protected in American history. But you know that in the 1960s it was illegal to say the F word on private property in a public setting. So the government was now dictating what could and could not be said on my property.
I mean, yeah, just there are cultural mores that are different in each time. And these were local obscenity laws. It wasn't usually a federal obscenity law, at least when like Jim Morrison got arrested and things like that. But this is, they'll let us use vulgarities while we can't just criticize the state as if that's some great free speech. I mean, he's missing out on self-censorship and the Biden administration telling social media companies who they want removed for not towing the establishment line on elections or COVID.
yeah, I mean, there's another problem is that the government has taken over so many institutions that they're now considered public institutions. And so, for example, professors at public universities have to call a man a woman if he wants to be referred to as a she, and things like this, where the government is censoring you or controlling your speech because they have taken over this property, and now it's considered public property. So yeah, maybe they've relaxed on censorship on private property, but how much private property is there really? And is it considered totally private, or is it private where the government influences you, like with Facebook or Twitter or whatever, like, because this company might rely on public property like telephone lines or something like that. Now the government steps in, or they have the power of antitrust behind them. And so now they can threaten you with removal of your company or just breaking your company up if you
Right.
don't obey these regulations that they give you based on speech.
I mean, he was warning us in 2015 after you could pretty much say dirty words that free speech was in danger. Did it just get magically better over the past 9 years to him, or is he just happy Biden's president? Or did he decide that it's a fight we can't win, so it's better to declare it solved?
Yeah, I think both. maybe maybe he thinks it magically got better, but then also it's a fight we can't win. Another point I wanted to make about the previous clip, and it also relates to this one as well, is that um, the government can allow a certain amount of free speech now. They can let us bitch and moan all we want about, their ruling of the institutions, or, their domination of the institutions. Um, and they can do this because our free speech doesn't matter too much anymore. The like we began this episode with the universities and how they're just, and the teachers and professors, how they're destroying the minds of our youth, um, and teaching the leftist ideas. The people can't think, and so what they say doesn't matter much anymore. It's not a threat to the government if dumb people speak their mind freely. No, that's not a threat. What's a threat are the smart people who are speaking, and those are the people who are being hit with a hammer. Like they're
They
going,
pick targets.
yeah, if you have a voice that's rational, or you're an intelligent person in the culture and you've made a name for yourself, you're popular, like Elon Musk or something like that, the left will come at you. They'll try to cancel you. And
And
so, and even,
certainly when you stand up against them, if you're like one of these both side shills, you can probably get away with it even as a rich person for a while. But if you start saying, hey, there's a woke mind virus, they're coming after you hard with everything they got.
oh yeah, and that's why a lot of people on the right have distanced themselves from establishment and from mainstream cultures because they got canceled. And so now they have to create new institutions and rely on the right or the conservatives or the Republicans to support them so they can maintain their voice and have a career in whatever field it is, if it's like media or schools or whatever they're doing, that and whatever they said that got them canceled from mainstream, now they're in the counterculture. And so I think we need to have this big shift to the right and to the right counterculture in order to support them and make it so that we can battle the left and hopefully uh, dwindle their resources and eventually eliminate them.
Yeah, I agree, but that you first have to acknowledge there's a threat. I mean, ultimately, to the extent there are real threats out there, the people calling out the actual threats risk making targets of themselves.
As long as I'm under the radar, even if political violence increases, they probably are not coming after me.
There you have it.
I think he likes being under the radar. He's he
You know what the
hasn't
people in charge of the radar don't like? People who identify them as threats.
Yeah. Well, I've suggested several times how Youron can get canceled, but he never does it. You know,
He was
he
saying earlier in that clip, he hopes to get at least, needing security. It means he's having an impact on the world before he made that statement, which I think
I mean,
reflects more of his true attitude. Um,
well, one of the first steps is just for him to say something that goes against this leftist claptrap, the woke nonsense. Like he could point out that this person in the government who's that the transgender person in the government, I forget his name, but call him a he because he's a he, and maybe he'll get canceled, or
what is that?
he could go up against Biden more and he'll get canceled.
And again, how in line with Rand is this? It's like Howard Rourke laughed as he flew under the radar.
Yeah. Well, what I don't know if Youron wants to be under the radar. I think he, well, maybe he does because he's very good at just fighting his chat room. It's like he's at war with his chat room more than he's at war with the left.
That's the
So
point. Anyone telling him there's a threat out there is more the enemy to him.
yeah, he expends a lot of energy on fighting his chat room. It's just ridiculous. So I think maybe he does want to be under the radar. He wants to have a little cult following over there on his in his chat room or his YouTube or wherever. I don't know where he hangs out. Twitter, is that where he gets most of the love? I don't know. So I think he's not trying very hard to be popular. He doesn't want to have the light shined on him so that then he'll get canceled because he actually does want to survive in mainstream
Yeah,
culture.
you can't get published in the Atlantic if you cancel.
Yeah, but I hope he realizes that the left hates him. I mean,
He
why would he
doesn't
want?
realize that. That's the whole thing. They hate him. They hate us. They think Rand's a racist and a colonizer. They think anyone for capitalism is a racist and a colonizer. But he's just like, oh, they're not a threat.
Yeah. So, well, maybe he does, but he wants to be loved. Maybe he's in a really bad relationship with the left. It's like a love-hate thing. He wants to be taken seriously by the left, but they're never going to take him seriously. I don't know.
Yeah.
He just keeps saying things. He's too much of a vestigial socialist. Like he grew up being a socialist. I think there's still too much of that in his bloodstream, and he just
The
can't
part
go.
that thinks their win is inevitable.
Yeah, I don't know what he
Um,
saw. I don't know what he saw over there in the Middle East, but maybe that convinced him that we're not going to win.
yeah. Well, we talked a lot about a lot of really good things today. Any final thoughts?
I like to compare threats to like if you were just a normal person in a relationship or something and someone started stalking you or harassing you, you'd get a restraining order against them. And that's merely because of something they said or did and it didn't directly physically harm you. I think we're in the same situation with the left. They're saying things and doing things that threaten a takeover of America, and we need to get a restraining order, some sort of political restraining order against socialists. Um, so that's my final thought, and I hope that we can form some sort of coalition with the right to achieve that goal of just eliminating the threat from the left.
Very nice. Well, again, this has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig, and we will see you next time.